I don't think reparations for something that happened 150 years ago, for whom none of us currently living are responsible, is a good idea. We've, tried to deal with our original sin of slavery by fighting a civil war, by passing landmark civil rights legislation. We've elected an African American president. I think we're always a work in progress in this country, but no one currently alive was responsible for that. And I don't think we should be trying to figure out how to compensate for it. First of all, it'd be pretty hard to figure out who to compensate.
Now, Mitch McConnell does have a point. There is no one alive that owned slaves over 150 years ago, but the damage done by slavery to African Americans still exists to this day. Now, has the United States ever paid reparations to anyone? Well, according to a lot of people in white America, of course not. And should reparations ever be paid to anyone? They will tell you no, time and time again. You can watch Fox News anytime you like. When this subject comes up, they will vehemently tell you no one should ever be paid reparations. And they will even lie and tell you that no one ever has been paid reparations. But I beg to differ. Apparently, people don't understand that there's a thing called the internet and history. They should probably check it out. So in 1862, President Abraham Lincoln signed a bill emancipating enslaved people in Washington, D.C. Now, they were emancipated, but the only people who benefited from this were the slave owners. Now, to ease the slave owners' pain, Lincoln's bill stated that they would receive up to $300 for each enslaved person freed. That's correct. Reparations for slave owners for the pain of having to give up their property, otherwise known as enslaved people. Now, this debate about slavery is pretty heated, but let's not forget that the slave owners, far more than the enslaved people, were always the primary beneficiaries of reparations. Now, in 1833, there was a gentleman by the name of William Lord Garrison who argued that, being an abolitionist as he was, he argued that if compensation is to be given at all, it should be given to the outraged and guiltless slaves, and not to those who have plundered and abused them. But of course, this fell upon deaf ears, even the deaf ears of Abraham Lincoln himself, who did not agree with him, and stated that property rights were buttressed by the Fifth Amendment, which required just compensation for government seizure of private assets, otherwise known as property. Slaves, having people as property, was to be compensated. Now, more than 1,000 slaveholders petitioned for the right to claim the monies for 3,000 enslaved people in the District of Columbia. Now, over $1 million was given out to these slave owners. $1 million. None of the money was ever given to any of the slaves. Now, if you look at that in today's terms, that would be about $25.3 million just for those 3,000 enslaved people. That's a lot of money in today's terms and standards. Now, slave owners felt that they were entitled to receive compensation from local and colonial and state legislatures, especially when there was a time of crisis or war. So when enslaved men and women ran away or participated in rebellions or were executed for crimes they committed, especially during the Revolutionary War, slave owners asked to be compensated when they died. I mean, for example, if they sided with the British and fought against the United States or ran away, the slave owners were able to be compensated by the government for the loss of that slave, that property. So in 1804 as well, there was an abolitionist act that was unsuccessfully put into Congress, and it was a gradual abolition act, and it was put into New Jersey. And it says, well, basically, it didn't free anyone immediately. It allowed children of enslaved women to be treated as apprentices, otherwise known as slavery by another name, or slavery with extra steps, until they reached a certain age, and then they would be freed. Now, the law included a clause that allowed slave owners to gain compensation by letting their bondspeople go free and then reclaiming them as bond out labor, which gave them access to state funds for all their troubles of having to let someone go free. Now, in the 1850s, an abolitionist by the name of, I'm probably going to master this gentleman's name, Elihu Burritt, organized the National Compensated Emancipation Convention in Cleveland to advocate for the payments to slave owners, as well as smaller sums to be paid to people they had enslaved. Of course, nothing came of this proposal whatsoever. And reparations, of course, isn't just something that was done in the United States or pressed by the United States, because in England, when they abolished slavery in its Caribbean colonies, it offered compensation to 46,000 slave owners at the cost of around $26.2 million. That's a lot of money, even by today's standards. And France, they were even more cruel when it came to compensating slave owners, because they penalized Haiti for revolting against slavery. And then they levied huge amounts of money against the island by putting them in debt for decades. And then the former slaves were forced to pay the former slave owners in exchange for official recognition as the first black independent nation state in the Western Hemisphere. So the former slaves had to pay money to the slave owners, the former slave holders. They had to pay them for enslaving them. All right, now, as we know today, a lot of critics and skeptics, they will say that enslaved people should have asked for, their compensation back then. And it happened. A lot of African Americans, they did. They went on and they tried to put legislation through so that they can be, get reparations for what they went through. It was called the freedom dues. And they sued the states of former slave masters for all the work that they had done for free while in bondage. Very few of these were successful by any stretch of the imagination, and no one really got paid for their lawsuits. So it was fruitless, more or less. However, the only reward that I think anyone ever received was something called the Back to Africa. I guess it was a movement or a petition that was signed. And it was an act that allocated for $100,000 for the voluntary removal of newly freed people. And this is at about $100 per person to go to Liberia or Haiti. This rarely happened. Very few, if any, that I'm aware of actually got to go back to Haiti or Liberia, which were two of the poorest nation states that you could possibly live in at that time, and still are not the best of places to be. So it just seems that, it's easy for someone to say that we should never pay reparations, especially when those people have black skin or brown skin. So there's always a lot of hemming and hawing. It's sad to have someone be paid for the enslavement, murder, rape, separation of families of other people, or to own people, to pay someone for owning another person. It's something, I don't know, it would kind of be like paying Hitler for murdering all the Jews. hey, Hitler, we're sorry that you had to murder all these people, gas them, and put them in ovens, but because of all the work that you had to do that, we're going to pay you millions of dollars for murdering people. It's utterly ridiculous. But anyway, I would like to say thank you for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe. And if you'd like to see more videos from me and get notifications, please ring the bell down below. Thank you, and have a nice 4th of July.